In the heart of West Africa, over 2,500 years ago, iron flowed like blood through clay furnaces, transforming soil into steel and sparking one of humanity's earliest technological revolutions. This wasn't happening in Egypt, it wasn't happening in Greece, it was happening in a place most history books barely mention: ancient Nigeria, in a civilization called the Nok. They left no pyramids, no scrolls, no written records. But in their hands, iron ore became tools, weapons, and symbols of power. At a time when vast regions of the world still clung to bronze, the Nok were engineering something extraordinary, and yet their name is barely whispered outside of archaeological circles. Why? How did such an advanced civilization rise so early and then vanish so completely? The Nok people shattered long-held beliefs about Africa's place in technological history. For generations, mainstream narratives dismissed sub-Saharan Africa as a land without innovation, without science, without history. But the truth, buried beneath layers of colonial bias and academic neglect, tells a radically different story. Iron smelting isn't just a technical skill, it's a civilizational leap. It enables agriculture, warfare, infrastructure, the very bones of empire building. The ability to pull metal from rock and shape it into tools of survival and progress was a game changer. And deep within the Nigerian plateau, Nok blacksmiths were doing just that, independently, centuries before many others. Archaeologists have unearthed fragments of ancient furnaces, discarded slag, and finely crafted terracotta that tell of a people both technologically gifted and artistically inspired. The precision, the chemistry, the scale, all point to a complex society whose mastery of iron defies outdated timelines. This is not just a history lesson, it's a reckoning. In this video, we'll uncover the brilliance of the Nok, question the narratives we've been taught, and shine light on the fire that once burned at the center of Africa. It's time to remember that civilization's flame was not lit in one place, but in many. And long before others caught fire, the Nok had already struck the spark. Before we can understand how the Nok revolutionized iron smelting, we need to understand who they were. A civilization lost in time, yet foundational to West Africa's ancient legacy. The Nok culture thrived between 1500 BCE and 500 CE in what is now central Nigeria, along the Jos Plateau and the Kaduna River Valley. This civilization existed in a region rich in iron ore, clay, and fertile land, all of which helped it flourish. They weren't an empire in the traditional sense. No kings or vast armies are etched into their record. But their societal cohesion, technological innovation, and artistic mastery reveal a people far more advanced than previously believed. The Nok are perhaps best known for their terracotta sculptures, hauntingly expressive human and animal figures, many of them life-sized, crafted with intricate hairstyles, body markings, and ceremonial postures. These artworks, some of the oldest known in sub-Saharan Africa, are more than art. They're time capsules, offering insight into Nok spirituality, social hierarchy, and identity. Their existence alone suggests a settled, organized society with divisions of labor and cultural sophistication. Yet for centuries, Nok culture was unknown to the outside world. It wasn't until the 1920s, during tin mining operations, that workers stumbled upon some of these terracotta heads. At first, they were treated as curiosities, souvenirs. But by the 1940s and 50s, archaeologists like Bernard Fagg began to recognize the deeper significance. Excavations revealed more than art. They found furnaces, slag heaps, iron tools, and living settlements, pointing to a society that had mastered the high-temperature processes needed for iron smelting. Despite limited excavation due to looting, erosion, and lack of funding, the archaeological evidence paints a compelling picture. The Nok were among the first sub-Saharan peoples to transition from stone and bone tools to iron, which allowed for more effective agriculture, hunting, and possibly even trade with neighboring cultures. They likely lived in small village clusters, practicing agriculture, pottery, and blacksmithing. Their economy appears to have been self-sustaining, though there's evidence of long-distance exchange. Nok artifacts have been found far from their original sites, suggesting a network of communication and commerce that spanned regions. Their tools included iron hoes, spears, and knives, indicating a society that not only survived but innovated. There is also some indication that they practiced early forms of crop rotation and land management, signs of agricultural intelligence that further set them apart. But who they were spiritually, politically, and linguistically remains largely speculative. The absence of written language means we rely solely on physical remnants to interpret their world. Still, what remains, their tools, their art, their forges, tells a story of creativity, resilience, and ingenuity. The Nok were not merely passive ancestors of modern African societies. They were innovators, artists, and metallurgists who laid down a foundation that would ripple through future cultures, from the Yoruba to the Benin Kingdom. To understand Africa's history, we must stop viewing it as a dark void and instead light it with the embers of civilizations like the Nok. They are proof that deep within the continent's past lies a furnace of brilliance waiting to be rediscovered. To truly grasp the brilliance of the Nok civilization, we need to examine their most groundbreaking achievement: iron smelting. Long before metallurgy became widespread in many parts of the world, the Nok were already transforming raw earth into iron, a feat requiring precise knowledge of chemistry, physics, and engineering. Iron smelting is the process of extracting pure iron from its natural ores, typically hematite or magnetite. This involves heating the ore to extremely high temperatures, upwards of 1200 degrees Celsius, in a furnace, reducing the iron oxide into molten iron using charcoal as the reducing agent. What sounds like advanced chemistry today was second nature to Nok blacksmiths over 2 millennia ago. The technology they used is remarkable. Archaeologists have uncovered remnants of bowl furnaces made from clay, designed with lateral openings to allow air to flow through, aided by bellows or blowpipes. This airflow was crucial to reaching the high temperatures needed for smelting. Slag, the byproduct of separating metal from ore, found near these furnaces, is rich in iron, confirming the intensity and success of their process. What's even more astonishing is that the Nok likely developed this technique independently. For years, scholars assumed African metallurgy was borrowed from other civilizations. But the scale, age, and consistency of Nok iron artifacts suggest a local innovation, one that may even predate iron smelting in parts of Europe and the Near East. The archaeological record includes knives, arrowheads, farming implements, and blacksmithing tools, all made of iron. These tools would have had a massive impact on daily life. Iron blades made clearing land and cultivating crops easier, allowing for agricultural expansion. Iron-tipped weapons improved hunting and defense. In essence, iron gave the Nok people a technological edge that transformed their environment and elevated their society. But smelting iron isn't just about heat and tools. It also required extensive knowledge of materials, which clays could withstand extreme temperatures, how to construct furnaces that wouldn't collapse, how to balance charcoal, ore, and airflow. These are engineering decisions informed by generations of trial and error, passed down orally through apprenticeship and cultural tradition. In fact, smelting was likely a sacred or ritualized process. In many African societies, blacksmiths were not only craftsmen, but spiritual figures, mediators between the earthly and the elemental. They transformed what was buried deep in the earth into tools of life and power. It's likely the Nok held similar beliefs, seeing ironworking as a form of divine craft. Smelting also reshaped the Nok's social structure. Those who controlled the technology, the blacksmiths and furnace builders, held significant influence. Some may have formed an elite class, respected for their ability to conjure iron from rock. Their knowledge was power, quite literally forged in fire. Moreover, the presence of so many furnaces and the volume of slag indicates production beyond household needs. This points to a level of specialization and perhaps even trade. Nok iron may have reached neighboring communities, exchanged for goods, food, or crafts. This suggests that the Nok weren't isolated. They were part of a broader regional network, spreading their technological influence outward. The scale of production also hints at organized labor and planning. Building furnaces, maintaining charcoal supplies, mining ore, and smelting iron all require coordination. This wasn't a casual weekend task, it was an industry, one that positioned the Nok among the earliest technological societies in human history. Some researchers even speculate that Nok iron smelting involved seasonal organization, with specific months set aside for mining, building, and forging. This would mean their economy was not just advanced, but rhythmically structured, a blend of labor, ritual, and environmental awareness. Perhaps the most fascinating aspect is how little credit they've received. While Greek and Roman metallurgy is celebrated in textbooks and documentaries, the Nok remain a footnote, if they're mentioned at all. Yet their achievement stands shoulder to shoulder with any ancient civilization. They mastered the forge without writing it down, without leaving behind sprawling cities or marble temples, only broken tools, slag, and clay that whisper their genius through the soil. To look at a Nok furnace is to glimpse the mind of an ancient engineer. To hold a Nok iron blade is to hold a piece of innovation that once shaped the course of a continent. And to ignore their contribution is to leave a gap in the story of human progress. The fire they lit was not just physical, it was metaphorical, a spark of ingenuity, burning against the odds, illuminating a truth too often forgotten, that Africa, too, was a crucible of invention. When placed against the timeline of global technological development, the Nok's iron smelting capabilities challenge long-held assumptions. Were they isolated geniuses? Were they late adopters? Or were they early pioneers, potentially ahead of civilizations we've always credited with technological primacy? Most conventional histories of metallurgy begin with Mesopotamia, Anatolia, or the Indus Valley. Iron use in the Near East dates back to around 1200 BCE, often linked with the Hittites. In India, archaeological records suggest iron was in use by roughly 1000 BCE. China's Iron Age began around 600 BCE, and Europe didn't fully embrace iron until after 800 BCE. Now consider the Nok. By 1000 BCE, and possibly as early as 1500 BCE, they were already producing iron tools and slag in significant quantities. That puts them squarely within, if not ahead of, the first wave of global iron technology. The timing alone forces a critical reassessment of how and where iron smelting began and spread. This leads to two competing theories. One suggests ironworking was independently invented in multiple regions, what scholars call polycentric innovation. The other posits diffusion, that the technology originated in one place and gradually spread. If diffusion were true, we'd expect to see transitional stages as iron knowledge moved south into Africa. But in Nok territory, there are no such half measures. The smelting furnaces, the tools, the slag, all appear fully formed, suggesting the Nok didn't learn from others, but rather innovated on their own. This is especially important because it defies the colonial narrative that portrays Africa as technologically derivative, always learning, never leading. The evidence from Nok sites tells a radically different story, one of African originality, where indigenous people pioneered techniques as complex and impactful as anything in classical Europe or Asia. Another fascinating comparison lies in the style and context of ironworking. In Mesopotamia and Greece, metallurgy was closely tied to militarism and imperial expansion. In contrast, Nok iron seems more rooted in community needs: farming, hunting, crafting. This doesn't diminish its importance, it reframes it. The Nok weren't building empires, they were sustaining ecosystems, cultures, and communities. Their iron was a tool for growth, not just for conquest. The sophistication of Nok furnaces, bowl-type designs with complex airflow management, also places them ahead of what was typical in many parts of the world at the same time. These furnaces reveal not only technological precision, but also an intimate understanding of thermodynamics and material behavior. Cultural context also matters. Unlike many other ancient iron cultures, the Nok left behind a robust artistic record in tandem with their metallurgical feats. Their terracotta figures suggest that ironworking didn't exist in isolation, but was part of a broader cultural and symbolic framework. This dual legacy of art and metallurgy makes them unique among early Iron Age societies. And yet, the Nok are rarely included in global discussions of ancient innovation. While Greece is praised for philosophy, Egypt for architecture, and China for invention, Africa, and specifically the Nok, are often omitted. This exclusion isn't accidental. It reflects a long-standing bias in academic history, a tendency to view African civilizations as peripheral rather than central. The truth, however, is simple and powerful. The Nok stood shoulder to shoulder with the world's earliest metallurgists. They weren't just participating in the Iron Age, they were shaping it. Their story forces us to redraw the maps in our minds. It demands that we move Africa from the margins of historical progress to its rightful place at the very core of human ingenuity. For centuries, the story of Africa's past has been told through someone else's lens, distorted, diminished, and often dismissed. The Nok culture is a powerful example of how entire civilizations can be obscured by historical bias, colonial narratives, and academic neglect. One of the most damaging myths is that sub-Saharan Africa had no history before European contact. This falsehood, perpetuated through colonial education systems and 19th century anthropology, painted the continent as a cultural blank slate. The reality? Africa was home to complex societies, vibrant trade networks, and groundbreaking innovations, long before European ships ever touched its shores. The idea that Africans could have developed iron smelting independently was once outright rejected by mainstream scholars. Many believed iron technology must have come from Egypt, Carthage, or the Middle East. But the evidence from Nok sites, dated reliably to well before many northern civilizations had developed iron on a wide scale, makes that position increasingly untenable. The lack of transitional or borrowed technology suggests that Nok ironworking was a local, organic development. Still, academic reluctance lingers. Part of the reason lies in the fragmented archaeological record. Many Nok artifacts were discovered accidentally by miners or looters, often without proper documentation or preservation. Entire furnaces have been lost to erosion. Priceless terracotta statues have been smuggled out of Nigeria and sold on international markets, divorced from the context that could have helped explain them. This creates the missing links problem. We know the Nok were advanced, but the gaps in their story make it hard to draw a complete historical arc. Who taught them to smelt iron, if anyone? How were their communities organized? Did their technological knowledge spread to other cultures or die with them? Without written records or intact settlements, much of their history remains speculative. There's also the issue of visibility. Western history often prioritizes monuments, military conquests, and centralized states. The Nok left no pyramids or palaces. Their greatness was in their everyday genius, in clay furnaces, terracotta figures, and iron tools that transformed their world. But because this doesn't fit the traditional mold of civilization, their story is too often overlooked. Another common misconception is that African technology stagnated. On the contrary, the Nok and their successors contributed to a continuum of innovation that spread throughout West Africa. Later cultures, like the Yoruba, Ife, and Benin, developed advanced bronze casting, architectural engineering, and socio-political systems, many of which drew from the same metallurgical roots Nok had pioneered. Colonialism further muddied the historical waters. When European powers carved up Africa in the 19th century, they also rewrote its past, sometimes literally. Artifacts were taken, names changed, and oral histories suppressed. Even today, museums across Europe hold Nok relics, disconnected from the land and people who gave them meaning. But things are changing. African archaeologists, historians, and communities are reclaiming the narrative. Institutions in Nigeria are fighting to repatriate stolen artifacts. Scholars are revisiting old assumptions and using new tools, from satellite imaging to radiocarbon dating, to piece together the Nok story with fresh eyes and open minds. The truth is, every furnace, every fragment, every forged blade is a clue, not just to what the Nok achieved, but to what we failed to acknowledge. Myths may have buried their story, but the evidence keeps rising from the ground, demanding to be heard. We owe it to history and to the future to tell the Nok story fully, without distortion, without erasure, because hidden in their legacy is a fire we almost forgot to see. The story of the Nok doesn't end with their disappearance. It lives on in the echoes of African civilizations that followed, and in the contemporary movement to reclaim indigenous African knowledge. Their legacy, though fragmented, has shaped cultural, technological, and historical currents far beyond their ancient forges. One of the most direct descendants of Nok innovation can be seen in the metallurgy of the Yoruba, Ife, and Benin kingdoms. These later societies developed complex casting techniques, including the lost wax method used in the iconic Benin bronzes. While stylistically different, their metallurgical roots trace back to the Nok. not just in technology, but in the integration of art, ritual, and function. In fact, the symbolic role of metalworkers as both artisans and spiritual leaders persisted throughout West African cultures. In many regions, blacksmiths were revered, often regarded as possessing mystical powers. This sacred role echoes the likely position of Nok ironworkers, suggesting a long-standing African worldview where innovation and spirituality were not separate domains, but intimately linked. The Nok also influenced material culture. Patterns seen in Nok terracotta reappear in later sculpture traditions, in facial expressions, hairstyles, and body markings. This continuity hints at more than aesthetic inheritance. It points to cultural memory, passed down through generations, not by writing, but through craft, ritual, and oral tradition. But perhaps the most profound legacy of the Nok lies in what they represent today. In the face of centuries of erasure and distortion, their story is now being reclaimed by African scholars, students, and artists. Universities across the continent are teaching Nok history not as a side note, but as a foundational chapter of African ingenuity. Museums in Nigeria are fighting for the return of looted artifacts, and entire communities are working to preserve Nok heritage as a source of pride and identity. This movement isn't just about archaeology, it's about narrative. For too long, Africa's story has been told from the outside, shaped by those who saw the continent as a passive backdrop to world history. The Nok remind us that Africa was never passive. It was inventive, vibrant, and essential to the global human journey. In a world still grappling with the legacies of colonialism, the Nok offer a counter-narrative, not one of victimhood, but of achievement. Their mastery of iron smelting is a testament to what African civilizations accomplished without foreign tutelage, without monumental armies, and without the need to imitate others. They forged their own path, quite literally. For young Africans today, this history matters. It affirms that innovation is part of their heritage. That genius did not arrive with colonization, but existed long before it. That their ancestors were creators, scientists, and artists who contributed to the world in profound ways. For the world at large, remembering the Nok is a call to expand our historical imagination. To see that brilliance can emerge anywhere, in the jungles of Nigeria as much as the valleys of the Nile or the hills of Rome. That the cradle of civilization had many rooms, and Africa held more than one of the keys. The Nok may have vanished from the landscape, but their flame endures. In every artifact, every rediscovered fact, and every voice now speaking their name aloud. Their story is not just African history, it's human history, and it's far from finished. The Nok didn't build empires or carve their names into stone, but what they did was arguably more enduring. They mastered the earth itself. In the crucible of fire and ore, they forged tools that fed communities, sculptures that captured spirit, and a legacy that now challenges everything we thought we knew about the origins of technology. Their story is not one of conquest, but of creation. It's the story of a people who turned mud and minerals into civilization, who built furnaces that roared with precision and purpose, who lived without writing, but not without wisdom. They remind us that greatness isn't always loud. Sometimes it's buried in soil, waiting to be uncovered. We've now seen how the Nok emerged, innovated, and inspired, through artistry, engineering, and enduring cultural echoes. We've explored their impact on later African civilizations, and the ways their legacy is being reclaimed in our own time. We've also exposed the myths and blind spots that tried to erase them from memory. The Nok matter, not just because they were first, but because they remind us that history is vast, and genius is not the property of one people, place, or continent. The Nok lit a fire in the Iron Age, and that flame still burns in the knowledge, pride, and potential of Africa today. Their story urges us to broaden our understanding of innovation, to look beyond the familiar names in Western history books, and to listen more carefully to the voices carried by artifacts, landscapes, and oral tradition. It's a call to question the frameworks we've inherited, and to recognize that entire chapters of humanity's progress have been unjustly left out. So let this not be the end of their story, but the spark that inspires more. More questions, more research, more respect. Because the world needs to know, the Nok were never lost. We just weren't looking hard enough. If you found this story as powerful as we did, help us spread the flame. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because history, especially the kind buried in silence, deserves to be heard loudly. And remember, sometimes the greatest revolutions start in the places we least expect. Sometimes they begin with fire.